Ladies and gentlemen, step right up to the final, and we mean it this time, final episode in our discussion lecture series of Jane Eyre with Jennifer Avery. What are we going to do today, Jennifer?
Well, we're going to finish this sucker.
Let's do it.
The last time that we did this, Jane had come back to Mr. Rochester at Ferndean, his house that he owned in the woods, and Jane has discovered that he is blind and crippled and everything like that. And they have had a bit of conversation about where Jane had been and what her intentions are and what Mr. Rochester's intentions are. And Jane has teased Mr. Rochester about some of the information, the principal of which is Sinjin Rivers, who wanted to marry Jane and take her to India to be a missionary's wife. So this leads up to this sort of interrogation from Mr. Rochester, asking Jane different questions about Sinjin, about whether about what kind of person he is and what they did, and now he's asking about what they did together. And she tells Mr. Rochester that, oh well, he taught me Hindustani, and this kind of perks up Rochester's ears, and he says, wait a minute, why did he want you to learn Hindustani? And she says that because he wanted her to go with him to India. And Rochester's like, here it is. He wanted her to go to India with him. And Jane tells him he asked me to marry him. And Rochester says that is a fiction, an impudent invention to vex me. And Jane says, no, it's true. And then Rochester gets a little bit moody again, and he says, Miss Eyre, I repeat it, you can leave me. How often am I to say the same thing? Why do you remain pertinaciously perched on my knee when I have given you notice to quit? Because I am comfortable there. No, Jane, you are not comfortable there, because your heart is not with me. It is with this cousin, this Sinjin. Oh, till this moment I thought my little Jane was all mine. I had a belief she loved me even when she left me. That was an atom of sweet and much bitter. Long as we have been parted, hot tears as I have wept over our separation. I never thought that while I was mourning her, she was loving another. But it is useless grieving. Jane, leave me. Go and marry Rivers. So Mr. Rochester's worried that Jane is actually in love with this guy. And Jane insists, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here. You're going to have to push me away. And Rochester says that the tone of her voice renews hope. And finally she comes out with it. She says, he is not my husband, nor ever will be. He does not love me. I do not love him. He loves as he can love, and that is not as you love, a beautiful young lady called Rosamond. He wanted to marry me only because he thought I should make a suitable missionary's wife, which she would not have done. He is good and great, but severe, and for me, cold as an iceberg. He is not like you, sir. I am not happy at his side, nor near him, nor with him. He has no indulgence for me, no fondness. He sees nothing attractive in me, not even youth, only a few useful mental points. Then must I leave you, sir, to go to him? And finally, this kind of convinces Rochester, and she assures him, like, you need not be jealous. I wanted to tease you a little, to make you less sad. I thought anger would be better than grief. But if you wish me to love you, could you but see how much I do love you, you would be proud and content. All my heart is yours, sir. It belongs to you. and with you it would remain, were fate to exile the rest of me from your presence forever. And so now Rochester's convinced. Jane tells him, look, it doesn't matter what happens, that you're the one that I love. You're the one I want to be with. And then we get a nice little, remember the horse chestnut tree where Rochester proposed to Jane.
Sweet.
The night after that, that night after he proposed to her, that chestnut tree was struck down with bolts of lightning. And we get this great little metaphor here. He says, I'm no better than the old lightning-struck chestnut tree in Thornfield Orchard. And what right would that ruin have to bid a budding woodbine cover its decay with freshness? You are no ruin, sir, no lightning-struck tree. You are green and vigorous. Plants will grow about your roots, whether you ask them or not, because they take delight in your bountiful shadow. And as they grow, they will lean towards you and wind round you, because your strength offers them so safe a prop. And so she even turns this sad little image into a positive. It's like, look, it doesn't matter if you're ruined, then you're still going to be supported, and other things are going to be supported by you, which means, of course, her. And then again, he asks her to marry her, and she says yes, of course. Let me see here. Okay. There's a little point here. Okay. And so they decided that they're going to get married, and they talk, and they decide, and Jane tries to get Rochester to come back inside, but he keeps talking. And they're talking about, he's like, oh, we need to get married very soon. I'm ready. You know, as soon as we get everything taken care of, the license, we're going to do it. And she tries to get him inside. And we had a discussion about this supernatural voice that Jane heard, about this miracle, as she puts it, that she hears his voice calling to her. And this is what happened from Rochester's side. Jane, you think me, I dare say, an irreligious dog, but my heart swells with gratitude to the beneficent God of this earth just now. He sees not as man sees, but far clearer, judges not as man judges, but far more wisely. I did you wrong. I would have sullied my innocent flower, breathed guilt on its purity. The Omnipotent snatched it from me. I, in my stiff-necked rebellion, almost cursed the dispensation. Instead of bending to the decree, I defied it. Divine justice pursued its course. Disasters came thick upon me. I was forced to pass through the valley of the shadow of death. His chastisements are mighty, and one smote me which has humbled me forever. You know I was proud of my strength, but what is it now, when I must give it over to foreign guidance, as a child does its weakness? Of late, Jane, only of late, I began to see and acknowledge the hand of God in my doom. I began to experience remorse, repentance, the wish for reconcilement to my Maker. I began sometimes to pray, very brief prayers they were, but very sincere. And here we go. So remember, we're talking about.
I like this a lot.
Yeah, we were talking about how religious is Rochester versus how religious is Sinjin, and like I said, they're kind of equal. It's just that Rochester doubted.
I got something to say about this. Keep going with it.
Okay. He says, some days since, nay, I can number them, 4. It was last Monday night, a singular mood came over me, one in which grief replaced frenzy, sorrow, sullenness. I had long had the impression that since I could nowhere find you, you must be dead. Late that night, perhaps it might be between 11 and 12 o'clock, ere I retired to my dreary rest, I supplicated God that if it seemed good to him, I might soon be taken from this life and admitted to that world to come, where there was still hope of rejoining Jane. I was in my room and sitting by the window, which was open. It soothed me to feel the balmy night air, though I could see no stars, and only by a vague luminous haze knew the presence of a moon. I longed for thee, Janet. Oh, I long for thee both with soul and flesh. I asked of God at once in anguish and humility if I had not been long enough desolate, afflicted, tormented, and might not soon taste bliss and peace once more. That I merited all I endured, I acknowledged. That I could scarcely endure more. I pleaded, and the alpha and omega of my heart's wishes broke involuntarily from my lips in the words, Jane, Jane, Jane. Did you speak these words aloud? I did, Jane. If any listener had heard me, he would have thought me mad. I pronounced them with such frantic energy. And it was last Monday night, somewhere near midnight. Yes, but the time is of no consequence. What followed is the strange point. You will think me superstitious. Some superstition I have in my blood and always had. Nevertheless, this is true. True, at least, it is that I heard what I now relate. As I exclaimed, Jane, 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 a voice, I cannot tell whence the voice came, but I know whose voice it was, replied, I am coming, wait for me, and a moment after went whispering on the wind the words, where are you? I'll tell you, if I can, the idea, the picture, these words open to my mind, yet it is difficult to express what I want to express. Ferndean is buried, as you see, in a heavy wood, where sound falls dull and lies unreverberating. Where are you seems spoken among mountains, for I heard a hill-sent echo repeat the words. Cooler and fresher at the moment the gale seemed to visit my brow. I could have deemed that in some wild, lone scene I and Jane were meeting. In spirit, I believe we must have met. You no doubt were at that hour in unconscious sleep, Jane. Perhaps your soul wandered from its cell to comfort mine, for those were your accents. As certain as I live, they were yours. Reader, it was on Monday night near midnight that I too had received the mysterious summons. Those were the very words by which I had replied it. Very important right here. I listened to Mr. Rochester's narrative, but made no disclosure in return. The coincidence struck me as too awful and inexplicable to be communicated or discussed. If I told anything, my tale would be such as must necessarily make a profound impression on the mind of my hearer, and that mind, yet from its sufferings too prone to gloom, needed not the deeper shade of the supernatural. I kept these things then and pondered them in my heart. So she doesn't tell Rochester that she experienced the same thing. And the reason she gives for that is that he's still too gloomy and he's still too pulled in this darker, superstitious direction to hear this, because she was afraid that it would influence him away from this religious awakening he's had. And so, yes, Rochester is a religious sort, but Jane knows that he questions it on occasion. Even though he believes it, he questions it.
Can we talk about this religious sort for a second? Can I just point out a distinction between him and Sinjin real quick? Okay. So it seems like that the true notion of repentance, the true where it actually manifests itself in our life, happens precisely at the moment when we realize our absolute nothingness. Okay. Mm-hmm. And not only, what does it mean to recognize our absolute nothingness? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that different people are brought low for different reasons. It may be demonstrated to us that what we believe knowledge to be may be absolute folly, or what we perceive strength can suddenly turn into weakness, as in the case of Rochester, where he's got it all, and then he ends up maimed. I think in a way, what is it, the old Leonard Cohen song where he says like the cracks are where the light gets in, right?
Uh-huh.
It's there might be something more authentic to the religiosity that Rochester eventually embraces because he is brought so low. Sometimes God has to exercise a very heavy hand on some of us in order to get through. It's like, hello, like, how much do I have to exact upon you in order for you to understand that your entire existence is parasitic upon me? Now, to contrast that with Sinjin, you know, he's such a young man. Has he really encountered any adversity in life that he has fully woven his beings into the dogmas that he professes? More akin to just an upstart peppy televangelist or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there might be a scenario where, when we're talking about the religious sort of what Rochester is, that he might have a deeper, more intense, and actual apprehension of what religious life is that is far superior to what Sinjin has. Okay, so that's all I want to say.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that distinction.
And as I understand it, along that same vein, as I understand it, those who are like people who say they've had marks of the stigmata are people who are very deeply devout and always have been, or maybe not have always have been, people who are deeply, deeply devout in their belief are more prone to these doubts, or more prone to such ideas as demonic possession or things like that. Like, it's like the closer you come, the more come to God, the harder forces try to take you away from it. And
right, because a soul is being taken out of Satan's basket and put into God's, right?
Yeah. And so, and that's, in a way, but it's all God's trial in Rochester's mind, because he acknowledges that he was, even the words that he uses, he says, what was it? At once in anguish and humility, he says, and where was it? But he says he was in a mood of repentance rather than like pity, self-pity.
Oh yeah.
And he had, like you said, he had been brought so low that he had to acknowledge that what he did was wrong, that what he did was not godly. And so he has been punished. And now that he understands, he is being rewarded by Jane coming back. But he is permanently scarred by this. And he even says, like in this last little bit that he says, I thank my Maker that in the midst of judgment he has remembered mercy. I humbly entreat my Redeemer to give me strength and lead henceforth a purer life than I have done hitherto. And so this whole experience has brought him closer to God. And Jane, of course, is deeply moved by this and feels even more akin to him now that they're on more equal footing as far as that's concerned. And so again, remember Charlotte Bronte, her father and her husband, but of course she got married after she wrote this, but we're both clergymen. And so she would have been a devout Christian. And so that's.
I do want to add that, you know, the way the deal works with God, right? The way the deal works with God when one repents, as far as I understand it, okay? And I speak without authority. I am not a clergyman. I'm just someone who reads the Bible and what I see. If we repent, the deal works that God extends his grace and we have eternity with him. But I don't think God is under any obligation to reward us necessarily in the Christian gospel in this life.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, it is the case, especially in the case with the apostles. All the apostles, with the exception, I believe, John, met untimely ends. All of them suffered persecution and were killed for their beliefs. If I have, I'll have to go double and check that, but I believe it was only, I believe John was the only one that died of natural causes. Eventually, they were all martyred for their beliefs. So I think it's very important when people are considering what religion is, it's not going to necessarily have a happy ending in this life.
Yeah.
It's and what's likely the case is that true Christian belief is completely at odds with this world, and you may be mocked till your dying day for believing in it. So, if anyone is thinking that Christianity will get them their dream girl, which maybe some people may think that that's the conclusion of this story, right? Is that
probably not?
I just want to clarify that God owes us no such things when we repent.
Yeah. Well, but see, but you know, Charlotte Bronte, I like to think that she was an idealist. And
I'm not saying that God won't deliver on those things, but He does not owe that to us. He gives us grace.
And you could look at it as a parable too, as like, you know, you did wrong, you were punished, you understand why, and now you're going to live better. Right. Now you're going to be rewarded. It's that age-old idea. Even atheists believe that well, maybe not atheists, but karma. People who aren't very religious may even believe in karma, and you know, things like what goes around comes around, and that's the whole.
But it's important to purify this from a biblical perspective, and I just want, just as the devout Christian in the conversation, that I don't think we want to mix those worldly ideas of karma into our biblical understanding of religion.
But in humanity,
I guess right. I just want to say that there is a reward, but it's in eternity. It's not necessarily here. It's the Christian message is that we are vapors and we're just passing through, and you know, God can elevate, but the real reward is to God in eternity.
And speaking as the agnostic, yeah. and in life as a human being, the way you treat others, what goes around comes around.
Oh, I don't disagree.
So
there's not total justice in this realm.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with that. But on a more everyday level, perhaps there is. Yeah. But in any case, you can look at it as a parable. You can look at it as idealism, or you can look at it as a freaking amazing love story. However you want to look at it, it's that age-old idea: what goes around comes around, and so Rochester has been redeemed. Jane is going to get married. Jane is finally getting what she wants to, after she suffered her entire life. But she has borne her suffering, and so she didn't suffer as greatly. She has borne her suffering with a level of religious understanding. And so that's the end of the chapters, and then we get to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, we just learn a little bit of what happens after they get married. And so it starts out, and this first sentence is one of the most famous lines in English literature. And she says, "Reader, I married him." And the reason why that sticks out to me, and probably to most Jane Eyre scholars, is because it's so straightforward, and it's what she wanted.
It was her choice.
It was her choice, yes.
Yeah,
she says, reader, I married him. He didn't marry me. I married him.
Which is a revolutionary idea, right? At this time.
It really, and again, we've talked about feminism in this book as well. And it's very much present there in a very early form of feminism. The woman has control of her life. The woman is every bit as capable and intelligent as the man.
She is not. She is not cattle. She is not property.
Exactly. And she does things on her terms, and she gets what she wants on her terms, which is was an amazing idea in those days. And this is why it's such a huge deal. One of the reasons, and other than it just being beautifully written and being a marvelous story, having marvelous characters. But in any case, she comes into the kitchen where the servants are working, and she just matter-of-factly tells them, it's like, look, me and Rochester are married now, so here's what's up. and of course, John and Mary are all like, oh, yeah, we knew it would be, and we're so happy and all that. And so everybody was really happy about that. And then we, let me see here. And then we get responses from people she writes to about her marriage, and she says, Diana and Mary approved the step unreservedly. Diana announced that she would just give me time to get over the honeymoon, and then she would come and see me. And then we get to Sinjin. How Sinjin received the news, I don't know. He never answered the letter in which I communicated it. Yet 6 months after, he wrote to me, without, however, mentioning Mr. Rochester's name or alluding to my marriage. His letter was then calm, and though very serious, kind. He had maintained a regular, though not frequent, correspondence ever since. He hopes I am happy, and trusts I am not of those who live without God in the world, and only mind earthly things. And then we learn about Adele. And Adele had been sent to school, and she went, and so Jane goes to see Adele at the school that she's at, and she discovers that the school. She says her frantic. Let's see. She looked pale and thin. She said she was not happy. I found the rules of the establishment were too strict. Its course of study too severe for a child of her age. I took her home with me. So basically, she goes to see Adele at the school. Adele's not happy. The school is very strict. They're probably beating the girls. Basically, what she means probably here, without saying it, is they're probably just treating them in much the same way Jane was treated when she was at Lowood, at which, of course, Jane is not going to stand for. And so she says that she takes her out of school and brings her home, and then finds another school that is more that's more to her taste, that's less severe and less like Lowood, essentially.
Right.
And again, this was a very revolutionary idea at this time. That because at that point in history, in England, children were seen almost as a commodity.
Oh yeah, right. This is, I mean, we're approaching the Industrial Revolution, and child labor and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and children were seen as subhuman in some cases, and so the schools reflected that. They were they ran like machines, everything is all about uniformity and beating out the curiosity.
You don't need no education.
Exactly. It's the meat grinder. There was the meat grinder in the wall.
Well,
but in any case,
Jennifer, I'm just going to plant this seed. Are we certain that we've gotten away from that?
Oh, I don't think that we have it all, but that's another subject for another time.
Well, I'm just going to plant the seed. Have we advanced so much over the uniformity of thought? I'm just going to plant that seed.
No, we have not. Made it look like it, but we're not there. But in any case, so in any case, Adele goes to this new school and she grows up well, and she comes back and helps Jane out a lot. And she says, by her grateful attention to me and mine, she has long since well repaid any little kindness I ever had it in my power to offer her. And as a ward, you need to understand, as a ward, Adele would have been not quite to the level of a Blanche Ingram or an Ishton or any of those folks that Rochester invited to his house, because she was a ward. She's not a natural daughter, and so she was not as high in rank in society. But of course, Jane doesn't care about that. And at this point, Rochester never really cared about that either. But still is something you need to remember. And then we get to, basically, it's like she's sitting at her desk writing this story, and she says, I hold myself supremely blessed beyond what, she says, I've now been married 10 years. I hold myself supremely blessed beyond what language can express, because I am my husband's life as fully as he is mine. No woman was ever nearer to her mate as I am, ever more absolutely bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. I know no weariness of my Edward's society. He knows none of mine, any more than we each do of the pulsation of the heart that beats in our separate bosoms. Consequently, we are ever together. To be together is for us to be at once as free as in solitude, as gay as in company. We talk, I believe, all day long. To talk to each other is but a more animated and audible thinking. All my confidence is bestowed on him. All his confidence is devoted to me. We are precisely suited in character. Perfect concord is the result. That's the dream, kids. That's the dream. But again, this is fiction.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But in any case,
I want to ask you about that for a second. Well, this isn't really a form question, but it is very interesting. I'm just kind of shooting off the cuff here, right? Is this whole the dream of perfect concord, right? Of these these Hallmark movie romances, right? I think it's a very interesting question to look at the history of love and understand, when did this dream become a dream? Have we always had such fanciful notions of romance?
Well, I think we've always had the notions, because even Romans had love stories like this. But of course, the Romans and all their mythology, like if you look at Orpheus and Eurydice, there's the best example probably of a love story in the Roman mythology fashion. Orpheus, if you don't know the myth, Orpheus was a musician who played his flute in the forest, and it awakened Eurydice, who was a wood nymph. And they fell in love, and they married, and everything was beautiful and marvelous and everyththing like that. And it was like this that they describe here. They always wanted to be with each other, all of that. And then poor Eurydice is walking through the woods one day and gets bitten by a snake and dies.
Yes, serpents always messing things up.
Yeah, the Greek mythology, man, that's the way it works. And really, those myths are more practical than some of the later love stories that we were talking about. And I think that a lot of that came about probably around, probably before that, like in some even in some fairy tales, things end up kind of screwed up. And folk tales, there's always something magical. But at this point in time, Gothic romances have become a big thing. And I think that's where it became most prevalent in English literature when it first started. And then before this was written, Pride and Prejudice was written. Now there is that Pride and Prejudice, which we will eventually study. Pride and Prejudice is the root of every romantic comedy you have ever seen in your life. It absolutely is.
I have mixed feelings. That is the next thing we're going to do. I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like I'm going to do a lot of deconstruction, but I also feel like it could be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's I say, but like that's why Pride and Prejudice is so important, is because it is the basis of modern romance. And so that's probably where our current idea first manifested itself.
Right. We can have a very interesting discussion about how literature actually can shape our psychology.
Yeah.
Which is, and then that's, that's a really powerful thing, because that might be upsetting to a lot of people, because you're like, oh my God, this conception of love, I've been totally brainwashed in this conception of love. And then you start to think about all the other things you can be brainwashed into. Mm-hmm. But it also, the other side of the coin of this, right, is that it really shows what the power of the imagination is, and how every one of us has an opportunity to reveal a reality or a layer of reality to anyone else if we, I don't know, if we make use of that imagination that we have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even Plato, wasn't it Plato who first came up with the idea of soulmates?
Well, I mean, the idea of first, right? That's going to be a goalpost that we're going to forever move. I mean, Plato had there's the symposium where the idea of soulmates is discussed. But I mean, I imagine it. I mean, look, I mean, it goes. It's the oldest story, right? In the symposium, there's this myth about how humans used to be double. Yeah. That like in the past, you and I were one being, and then the gods cut us in half, and then we spend the rest of our lives going back trying to find one another. Mm. That sounds in some ways similar to the idea of the creation story in the Bible, where he was made out of a rib, where there is this point of there's this physical connectivity between one another, and so there's a body soulmate.
Which of course Jane Eyre builds on more with the court of communion idea that Rochester and Jane have, and that's kind of the idea between the two of them, is that they are in fact kin, soulmate sort of thing. But in any case, I say that's the dream. Whether it's true or not, I don't think. but in any case, I just, it's just nice to be around somebody you don't want to kill all the time.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I think my soulmate is a book. I think I'm supposed to marry a book.
Well, mine is all of my characters, so
Well, you're polygamous.
There are different aspects that
I'm still monogamous. I think I'm just going to marry one book.
I'm a monogamous, in case anybody's wondering. But, my characters. That's my brain. My brain is my soulmate. There you go. My imagination. But in any case,
so wrap it up here. Okay. So bring everything to a close.
Okay, and we also learn here that Mr. Rochester was blind for the first 2 years that they were married, but one day he kind of starts to realize that he can see things, and he asks Jane, is your dress blue, are you wearing a necklace, and all of that. And so they go to basically an eye doctor, an oculist they call him, and he gets his sight back, although it's not great. But he can walk around without being led, so he's not blind anymore. And then we find out that both Diana and Mary Rivers are married. And then we find out that Sinjin is still in India 10 years after she and Rochester have been married, but it sounds like he's sick and he's not going to be around for much longer. And interestingly enough, she ends the conclusion on Sinjin. She doesn't end on herself. She doesn't end on Rochester. She ends on Sinjin.
You got a theory about that?
I'm sorry?
You got a theory about that?
You know, I actually have not. I've thought about it, and I think maybe it's to display the idea of the perfect Christian. Maybe, I don't know, but beyond that, I really have not figured that out yet.
Well, you've definitely given people something to ponder, to think about, the problem to wrestle with, which is all that we can kind of hope to do for people, right?
Yeah, she ends an entire book about herself and Rochester with Sinjin. And so, and that is very, and it makes me wonder if Sinjin is somehow modeled after after her father in some way, or
after Bronte's father.
Yeah, Charlotte Bronte's father. Yeah.
No, maybe it is some sort of tribute.
Yeah, and see that, and that's kind of what I think. What I think is a possibility that it's a tribute, but I'm still not certain why she does that. But
I think it's a good theory.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good theory.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar enough with the secondary literature to know, but it's a good theory. I like theories.
There's the end of Jane Eyre. And so
hey, we did good. You did good.
Thank you. But the takeaway, again, I'll just review the takeaways from Jane Eyre. First of all, and this is from a purely literary point of view. First of all, it is first person from a female's point of view, and the way it is written, as many people have called it, the first novel of the self, in which you get not only a few thoughts about what's happening, but you get deep emotional information and spiritual information about the main character, Jane. And you get probably deeper into a character than had been at that point, which is why a lot of people consider it the first novel of the self. And so that is a very important takeaway, and it's a style of writing that people still employ. It's the way I write, although I don't do first person. But first, okay, novel of the self, and secondly, feminism. Feminism is very early forms of feminism are very prevalent in this novel because, again, like we said, Jane does everything on her terms. Everything works out on her terms. Nobody rules her. Nobody tells her what to do. She does it all on her terms. And she works for herself. She maintains independence. Even though she's living under somebody else's roof, that would have been considered independence at that point because she's employed by these people and getting paid while she's living here. And thirdly, it's just the characterization in this book is remarkable. How she, and you know that she based these characters on people she knew, most likely, but a lot of it, I think, did come from her imagination. And again, there's such an understanding of personality and dynamics between people that these characters really come alive for people. Like I've said before, I see a lot of myself in Jane. And I'm sure that some men who read it see a lot of themselves in Rochester, because these characters are so beautifully developed. You know, like you could pick at, if Rochester were a real person, you would recognize him if you saw him out in the world.
Well, I would add a little bit of an addendum to the identity with certain characters. I don't think it is impossible for men to identify with Jane and for women to identify with Rochester, or to identify with them all at once.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's possible that we might see elements of ourselves, regardless of gender, in all of the characters.
Yeah, and I can agree. I will agree with that. I will agree with that.
Because Jane is not an alien to me.
I'm sorry?
Jane is not an alien to me.
Like, no, Rochester's not an alien to me either.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're right. Yeah, and you can see aspects of yourself in both of them, but it's just so well characterized that that's part of why this is such an important book. Is just so beautifully done, and the writing is very unusual. The first time I read Jane Eyre, I was like, well, she's not a very good writer. The way that she's, you know, doing some of these things, not by modern standards, but then you get to these when you've read it a couple of times and you get to some of these passages, like the one where the conversations that they have with each other are so detailed and so rich, and you can hear it. The way that it's written, you can hear it. And so, you know, that's an important aspect of this book too, is how well it's written. And so there you go. Would you add any takeaways?
I'm just so glad that we read this book. It's in my top 10. You know, I don't know what I have to update my top 10. You know, I got Moby Dick in there, and Pierre's in there, the Bible's in there, Jane Eyre is in there. But yeah, I don't know what order they're in, but yeah, it's in my top 10.
Yeah, I say men and women alike need to read it. Like I said, men, if for no other reason, read it so you understand how smart women think. That will give you so much insight y'all don't even know.
Oh, I'm just gonna let it hang right there. Yes, that's a fantastic idea. Well, anyway, all right. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'll have this uploaded to the website, Noetic, and on the app and on YouTube and SoundCloud and all the various platforms that you can find this stuff. And Jennifer and I will start Pride and Prejudice when we're ready to. So stay tuned, and we'll be in touch. All right. Bye.